There is a version of Rick Sanchez that the internet fell in love with. He is brilliant, he is untouchable, he does not care what anyone thinks, he goes anywhere he wants, and he always wins. People put him on t-shirts. They quoted him in their bios. They looked at a cartoon alcoholic who told his 14-year-old grandson that nothing matters and thought, yeah, that guy has it figured out. This video is about the other version. The one who destroyed an entire planet and told Morty not to think about it. The one who built a civilization of living people to power his car. The one who went to war with the United States government because someone asked him to shake their hand. Welcome to Ricktopus. You are going to want to stay for this one. Let us get into it. The love potion that ended a world. There is a moment in the 6th episode of Rick and Morty's first season where Morty buries his own body in a backyard. He digs the hole, he drags the corpse, he covers it up, and then he walks inside a house that isn't his, sits down on a couch that belongs to a version of himself that just died, and stares at a wall. The show plays a slow, sad song over this. Nobody says anything. Rick stands nearby looking mildly inconvenienced, and the episode just ends. That scene has stayed with people for over a decade, and not because it is shocking, though it is, but because of what it tells you about Rick Sanchez in the first 6 episodes of his existence. Before you have fully figured out who this person is, the show hands you the most important piece of information it will ever give you about him. When Rick breaks something badly enough, he does not fix it. He finds a replacement. He moves on. And the people around him are left to live inside whatever wreckage he left behind. The story of how a planet full of people got turned into monsters starts, as most disasters in this show do, with Rick doing something small and stupid. Morty has a crush on a girl named Jessica. This is not new information. Morty has liked Jessica since the very first episode, and his feelings for her are the kind of feelings that only a 14-year-old can have. Enormous, overwhelming, and completely one-directional. She barely knows he exists. There is a school dance coming up. Morty, running out of ideas, goes to Rick. Rick makes him a love potion. He pulls it together from vole DNA, voles being small rodents that are famous in the animal world for forming extremely strong pair bonds, and he hands it to Morty without hesitation. The logic is simple. Spray this on yourself near Jessica, she breathes it in, she falls in love with you, problem solved. Here's the thing Rick knows and does not say. The potion is built to be spread through contact. If Jessica has any kind of sickness, any virus that makes her contagious, the potion will latch on to whatever she is carrying and use it as a vehicle. It will not stay between two people. It will travel. Rick knows this. There is a brief moment in the episode where you can see Rick almost say something, almost add the warning, and then decide not to bother. He hands the potion over anyway. Jessica has the flu. Within minutes of Morty using the potion at the school dance, it has attached itself to Jessica's flu virus and gone airborne. By the time the dance is over, it has spread through the entire school. By the next morning, it has left the building. By the time Rick and Morty figure out what is happening, every single person on Earth, except for Morty's immediate family, who share his DNA and are therefore immune, is aggressively, desperately, dangerously in love with a 14-year-old boy. Rick does not panic. He puts together a cure. He is the smartest man in the universe, he reminds everyone constantly. And this is the kind of problem that a person like him fixes before breakfast. He grabs a collection of DNA from various animals, mixes it together, and sprays it over the affected population. The cure turns everyone into giant praying mantis creatures. Mantis people, specifically, who want to mate with Morty and then eat him immediately afterwards. This is worse. This is objectively, measurably worse than what was happening before. Rick, to his credit, recognizes this immediately and goes back to the lab. He throws together another formula. He sprays it over the population. This turns every single human being on Earth, except for Jerry, Beth, and Summer, into a Croninberg. The show borrowed this word from a filmmaker named David Croninberg, who spent his career making movies about bodies transforming in horrible ways. A Croninberg in the world of this show is a barely human mass of flesh and teeth and wrong limbs. Something that used to be a person and is now something much worse. The entire planet, billions of people, gone in the span of one afternoon because Rick rushed 2 cures without thinking either of them through. Morty is furious. He blames Rick. Rick, in one of the most revealing moments of the entire series, points out that technically Morty is the one who wanted to chemically force a girl to fall in love with him, which is a fair point that entirely misses the larger issue, which is that Rick knew about the flu risk and said nothing. Rick then looks at the Croninberg-covered planet and makes a decision. He is not going to fix this. He has looked at the situation, run the numbers in his enormous brain, and concluded that the math does not work out in favor of a solution. Instead, he opens up his interdimensional travel device and starts scanning alternate realities, dimensions where everything is essentially the same as the one they just destroyed, except for one key difference. He is looking for a version of reality where the alternate Rick and Morty found found a cure for this exact problem, successfully saved the world, and then died shortly afterward in an unrelated accident. He finds one. Of course he does. There are infinite dimensions. Rick and Morty step through the portal into this new reality. The world here is clean, normal. Everyone is human. The grass is green. The alternate versions of Rick and Morty are very recently dead, killed in an explosion in the garage, which means there is a gap that needs to be filled. Rick tells Morty what they are going to do. They are going to bury the bodies. They are going to take over these lives. They are going to move into this house, sit at this family's dinner table, and pretend to be the Rick and Morty that everyone here remembers. Morty is horrified. He asks what is going to happen to the world they left behind, to the original Jerry, the original Beth, the original Summer, none of whom turned into Croninbergs because of their shared DNA with Morty, all of whom are now completely alone on a planet where every other living thing wants to kill them. Rick tells him there is nothing they can do, so they should not think about it. This is not a throwaway line. Rick does not say they cannot fix it. He says they should not think about it. There is a difference between being unable to save someone and choosing not to. Rick has chosen. He picks up a shovel. They bury the bodies. The episode's closing image is Morty sitting on a couch in a house that is not his, staring forward, having just dug a grave for himself. The song playing is quiet and melancholy. It is one of the most genuinely affecting endings in the show's history, and it lands so hard because it is not played for laughs. The show is not winking at you. It is just showing you what happened. The after credits scene, the small bonus clip that plays after the main episode ends, shows the original dimension. Jerry and Beth are living out of an armored van, surviving by hunting Croninbergs for food. Summer is sitting in a cardboard box, acting out scenes from movies from memory. The three of them are somehow happy. Jerry says he does not miss Rick or Morty at all. Beth agrees. The world is destroyed, and they have found some version of peace in the wreckage. Then, Croninberg Rick and Croninberg Morty appear. Alternate versions from a dimension where everyone was born a Croninberg, and their accidental experiment turned everyone into a regular human instead. They have come to live in a world full of Croninbergs, which for them is home. The show is making a joke. It is also making a point. For every dimension Rick ruins, there is another Rick who ruined his own dimension slightly differently, making the same calculation, landing somewhere new, moving on. What the show is telling you, in the 6th episode of its existence, is that this is the cycle. This is who Rick is. This will happen again. And then it shows you what it cost. The original Jerry survives for years in that ruined dimension. Alone, resourceful, changed beyond recognition by what the world became after Rick left. Eventually, in the 6th season, when the portal system gets reset and Morty is sent back to his original dimension, he finds Jerry. Original Jerry is the last human alive on that Earth. He is tough and capable and deeply bitter, and the reunion is not warm. Not long after, Rick Prime, the show's main villain across the later seasons, finds Jerry in that dimension and kills him. The last surviving member of Morty's original family, the last living consequence of Rick's decision to abandon rather than fix, dies at the hands of another Rick. The Prime dimension, as the show calls it, is eventually dead. Every human in it gone. A planet that was once full of life ended because Rick made a love potion with a known risk and chose not to mention it, then fixed his mistake badly twice, then decided the whole situation was not worth the effort. He never goes back to try again. He never references it unprompted. The show moves on because Rick moves on, and the show tends to follow his lead. This is the decision that defines everything that follows. Not because it is the worst thing Rick ever does, it might not even crack the top 3, but because of what it establishes about how his mind works. When something breaks, Rick does not feel the obligation to repair it. He finds a version of the situation that works for him and steps into it. The people who get left behind in the broken version are not his problem, because making them his problem would require him to sit with guilt, and guilt is the one thing Rick's intelligence cannot dissolve. He gives Morty one piece of parting advice as they finish burying the bodies. He tells Morty that if he had not messed up as badly as he did, they would have been the alternate Rick and Morty who died in the explosion. In other words, your mistakes saved your life. Be grateful. Morty does not say anything. He walks inside. He sits down. The decision to hand over that love potion without the warning, 1 sentence, 5 seconds, a single honest moment, costs billions of people their lives, ends a civilization, and sets the stage for everything Rick and Morty will spend the next 6 seasons trying to process and escape. And Rick will tell you, if you ask him, that there was nothing else he could have done. He is lying. And somewhere, under all that confidence and deflection, he knows it, ____. quote _ 0 ___. What happened to the Croninberg dimension is devastating, but at least when Rick destroyed that world, he did it by accident. The next section is about a world Rick built on purpose, an entire civilization of living, thinking people he created to power his car, who never knew what they were for, and what happened when one of them finally figured it out. Section 2, the microverse battery, slavery with extra steps. Rick's car does not run on gasoline. It does not run on solar power, or electricity, or any fuel you could name. Rick's car runs on an entire civilization of living beings who spend their days walking on treadmills, not knowing that everything they produce goes straight into the engine of a vehicle parked in a suburban garage on Earth. This is not a metaphor. This is the literal premise of Season 2, Episode 6, and the show presents it so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it takes a moment to fully land. Rick built a universe. He put people in it. He gave those people a piece of technology that turns their physical movement into electricity. He told them that technology was for them, that they were generating power for their own civilization, that this was progress and advancement and the future. Then he took most of the electricity for himself and used it to start his car. He has been doing this for years before the episode begins. The episode starts simply enough. Rick, Morty, and Summer go to an alternate dimension to watch a movie, a film called Ball Fondlers, which is a recurring joke in the show about a generic action movie. And when they come back to the car, it will not start. Rick checks the engine. The battery is dead. He tells Morty they are going to have to go inside the battery to fix it. And when Morty asks what that means, Rick shrinks them both down and takes them into the car's power source. What they find inside is a planet. Not a metaphorical planet, a real one, with continents and cities and a population of living, thinking beings who have built a society from the ground up. Rick calls this place the microverse. He created it, he explains to Morty, by giving a species of intelligent creatures a piece of technology he called the Google Box, essentially a machine that converts physical effort into electricity. The people of the microverse use Google Boxes because they believe it powers their homes and cities. What Rick did not tell them is that he engineered the whole setup so that he receives the majority of what they generate. Their labor, their daily lives, their entire civilization. All of it feeds Rick's car. Morty stares at this for a moment and then says what any reasonable person would say. He calls it slavery with extra steps. Rick does not argue the point. He does not say Morty is wrong, or that there is a nuance here, or that the people of the microverse are actually better off because of the arrangement. He changes the subject. He moves on. Because the moment Rick starts actually engaging with the ethics of what he has done, he has to sit with the fact that he created conscious beings for the specific purpose of serving him, deceived them about the nature of their existence for years, and has been perfectly comfortable with this arrangement the entire time. He would rather talk about ice cream. The problem they have come to fix, it turns out, is that a scientist in the microverse named Zeep Zandflorp, voiced by Stephen Colbert, which is a detail worth noting because the casting choice signals immediately that this character is going to be formidable, has invented a new power source. Zeep's invention, which he calls the miniverse, does the same thing Rick's Google Box does. It creates a small universe inside the microverse, fills it with living beings who generate electricity, and harvests that electricity to power Zeep's planet. In other words, Zeep has done to his world exactly what Rick did to the microverse. The people of the microverse no longer need Google Boxes. They have Zeep's miniverse technology instead. Rick's car gets no power. Rick is furious. Not because of the ethical implications, not because he has suddenly realized, looking at Zeep's invention, that he is essentially watching someone else do to a smaller civilization what he did to the microverse. He is furious because his car is not working. Rick, Morty, and Zeep enter the miniverse together. The situation gets more complicated almost immediately. Inside Zeep's miniverse, a scientist named Kyle has built his own version of the same thing, a teeniverse, which is a universe inside the miniverse, inside the microverse, inside Rick's battery. 3 layers of nested civilizations, each built on the same lie, each told that their electricity generation is for themselves, each actually feeding something larger that they cannot see or know about. When Zeep confronts Kyle about the ethics of the teeniverse, using the same arguments Morty used against Rick, he stops mid-sentence. He realizes, in real time, that he is saying the exact words Rick said to Morty. He is criticizing Kyle for doing something that his universe is doing to a smaller one. And if Zeep's universe is doing it to Kyle's, then something must be doing it to Zeep's. He turns to Rick. He asks if Rick created his universe. Rick confirms it. Zeep's reaction is not quiet. He attacks Rick immediately, and the fight that follows is one of the most interesting sequences in the show. show because it is two people of equal intelligence who have just had the same realization at the same time, except one of them built the trap and the other one just discovered he has been living inside it his entire life. Rick has spent years going down to the microverse, being treated as a visiting genius, being called Rick the Alien by a civilization that views him with something close to religious awe. He has enjoyed this. He has taken pride in it. And Zeep, who is his intellectual equal, looks at him and sees exactly what he is. Meanwhile, Kyle, who has been watching this argument unfold, goes very quiet. Kyle starts thinking about his father. He has been working on the Teenyverse for years. He missed his father's funeral because of it. He poured his life into his invention. And now he understands that his invention is built on the same foundation as Zeep's, which is built on the same foundation as Rick's, which means his entire life's work and his life itself exists inside a chain of deception that goes all the way up to a man who just wants his car to start. Kyle does not say much. He gets in his spaceship, he kills himself. This leaves Rick, Morty, and Zeep trapped inside the Teenyverse with no immediate way out. They spend months there. Months in Teenyverse time, which does not match up to the time passing outside. The episode skips over most of this. What you need to know is that Rick and Zeep spend the entire time fighting, constructing weapons out of wood and rocks, building mechanical suits to beat each other with, refusing to cooperate because each of them is too proud to admit that cooperation is the only way they are getting home. Morty eventually gets so fed up that he goes to live with a tribe of primitive tree people in the Teenyverse wilderness, tries to build a simple life away from both of them, and within a short time concludes that living without technology is miserable and forces Rick and Zeep to work together. They get out of the Teenyverse. They get back to the microverse. On the way back to Rick's ship, Zeep attempts to strand Rick and Morty in the microverse, which is a reasonable response from someone who has just found out he is living inside a car battery. Rick outmaneuvers him, gets back to the ship first, and delivers the situation's final verdict. He will destroy the microverse, end the entire civilization, kill everyone in it, unless Zeep agrees to shut down Miniverse technology and return his people to the Google boxes. Rick will murder a universe full of people rather than find another way to charge his car. Zeep agrees. He has no choice. Rick smashes the Miniverse. Everyone in it, every living being in Zeep's smaller universe, including whatever was developing in Kyle's Teenyverse, is gone. Rick does this calmly, without anger, the way you might delete files on a computer that you no longer need. Two civilizations end in the span of a few seconds. Rick closes his hand around the Miniverse container and squeezes. Then he goes to get ice cream. This is where the episode closes, or nearly closes. Rick, Morty, and Summer go to an ice cream shop in this dimension, and Rick orders a cone. The waiter tells him that, as a result of the peace treaty Summer brokered between the humans and the giant telepathic spiders who share this planet, a whole separate situation that happened in the parking lot while Rick and Morty were inside the battery, ice cream is now served to everyone, including spiders. There are flies in it. Rick is furious. He turns to Summer and blames her for ruining ice cream in this entire dimension. He has just wiped out 2 universes, and he is upset about ice cream flies. The show plays this completely straight. Rick's priorities are exactly this ordered, and the episode refuses to pretend otherwise. What makes this section necessary, what makes it more than just a funny story about nested universes, is what it reveals about the structure of Rick's intelligence. Rick is genuinely the smartest being in almost any room he enters. He can build a universe. He can populate it with life. He can engineer a civilization from nothing. These are not small things, and the show is very deliberately showing you that intelligence and decency have nothing to do with each other. Rick did not create the microverse out of cruelty. He created it out of convenience. That might actually be worse. Cruelty at least requires some emotional investment in the people being hurt. What Rick did is more like what someone does when they do not think of another being as fully real, as a full person with a life that matters the way his matters. Rick can create a civilization and then leverage its destruction as a negotiating tactic in the same afternoon, and both actions feel equally effortless to him because the people inside the battery are not quite real to him in the way that his car is real to him, or his own comfort is real to him. Morty names this clearly and immediately: slavery with extra steps. He is not wrong. And Rick's non-response, the subject change, the pivot to the plot problem, the complete absence of any engagement with the accusation, is more revealing than any argument Rick could have made. Rick has no counter. He simply does not think the counter is required. The moment that stays with you, though, is Kyle. Kyle is a minor character. He has maybe 5 minutes of screen time, but he is the one person in this episode who fully understands what has been done to him and cannot survive the understanding. understanding. He built his life around his invention. He missed his father's death for it. He believed his work mattered, that it was real, that it meant something beyond himself. And then a man from a larger universe showed up and explained that Kyle's universe exists because that man wanted a power source, which means Kyle's invention exists because of an invention, which means the funeral Kyle skipped was skipped in service of a car battery. Kyle gets in his ship and ends his life before Rick even notices he is upset. Rick does not reference Kyle again. The show does not circle back to him. He is gone, and the universe he lived in is gone, and Rick is eating ice cream, or trying to, before the Spider Peace Treaty ruined it. This is the decision this section is about, not the creation of the microverse, which happened off-screen years before the episode begins. The decision this section is about is the one Rick makes in real time, with full information, with Morty standing right next to him calling it what it is. He could have acknowledged what Morty said. He could have looked at Zeep, his intellectual equal, someone capable of understanding him in a way almost nobody is, and said something honest about what the microverse actually is, and what it means that he built it. He could have, at the absolute minimum, noticed that Kyle was in crisis before Kyle made an irreversible decision. He did none of these things. He thought about ice cream. There is a line of dialogue in this episode that is easy to miss because it is buried in an argument and delivered fast, but it is one of the most honest things Rick says in the entire series. When Zeep is attacking him and screaming that he did not ask to be born into a universe that exists to power someone else's engine, Rick looks at him and says, "I made you. Your microverse is mine. That is all you are." He means it. He is not being cruel for the sake of cruelty. He is telling Zeep what he genuinely believes, which is that creation confers ownership. And ownership means the created thing exists for the creator's purposes, and anyone who has a problem with that has simply not understood the arrangement clearly enough. Zeep understands the arrangement now. That is the problem. __quote_1___ Rick created the microverse to solve a practical problem and walked away from every consequence without looking back. But the microverse at least happened because Rick was building something. The next section is about a decision Rick made to avoid something. The one thing his enormous brain cannot outthink. The one room he will do absolutely anything to stay out of. And the lengths he goes to are almost unbelievable until you understand what he is actually afraid of. Section 3. Turning himself into a pickle to avoid therapy. There is a Tuesday morning in the Smith household where Beth is getting her kids ready for family therapy. This is already unusual. Family therapy means someone, probably multiple someones, has decided that the way this family communicates is broken enough to require outside help. It means Beth has made appointments, coordinated schedules, and decided that whatever is happening inside this house needs a professional in the room to even begin untangling it. This is not a small thing. This is a mother deciding that her family is in enough pain that she is going to do something about it. Rick is not going. Or rather, Rick has decided he is not going in the most complicated, most labor-intensive, most genuinely impressive way that a person has ever decided not to go somewhere. He has spent what must have been hours in his garage laboratory. He has built something. He has injected himself with it. And when Beth comes downstairs on the morning of the appointment to find her father, she finds a pickle on the workbench instead. Rick has turned himself into a pickle, not metaphorically, not as a trick of the light. Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in the universe, has used his scientific knowledge to completely rewrite his own physical body at a level so deep that he is now, genuinely, a small green cucumber that has been preserved in brine. He has eyes, he can talk, he is still clearly Rick in every way that matters mentally, but he has no arms, no legs, no way to move himself, no way to undo what he has done without a specific antidote that he has already prepared and left sitting on the workbench in a syringe. Beth picks up the syringe and puts it in her purse. She does not say much about this. She looks at her father, the pickle, and she understands immediately what is happening and why. She takes the antidote with her, which means that without her choosing to come back and give it to him, Rick is going to be a pickle for the entire duration of the therapy session he was trying to skip. Then she takes the kids and leaves. The door closes. Rick is alone on the workbench. What follows is one of the most absurd and genuinely entertaining sequences in the show's history. Rick, being Rick, does not accept the situation. He looks at the workbench around him, assesses what he has available, and begins to work. A cockroach wanders nearby. Rick lures it close and bites through it, using the mechanics of its body to give himself something resembling locomotion. He falls off the workbench. He lands in the sink. He goes down the drain. He ends up in the sewer. The sewer is full of rats, large ones. Rick, who is now a pickle with a cockroach body attached to him by nothing except determination, fights them. He kills them. He builds himself a suit out of their parts, bones and muscle and whatever else he can harvest, until he has constructed something that walks upright and moves with genuine speed and can do damage. Then he fights his way out of the sewer and into a building, which turns out to be some kind of government facility full of armed men. He fights through all of them, too. The action sequence that takes up the middle portion of this episode is legitimately impressive by any standard. Rick, as a pickle, goes through trained soldiers and security systems and locked doors with the focused efficiency of someone who has done this kind of thing so many times that it barely registers as difficult. He is creative, he is fast. He adapts to each new obstacle in seconds. By the time he reaches the end of the facility, he has defeated everyone in it. He arrives at therapy with minutes left in the session. Dr. Wong is the therapist. She is composed, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by Rick. This is important. Almost every authority figure Rick encounters in the show is either afraid of him, outmatched by him, or desperate to use him for something. Dr. Wong is none of these things. She sits across from Rick, who is still a pickle, still wearing his rat skeleton suit, and she listens to him explain himself. And then she says something that Rick, for all his intelligence, cannot find a way around. She tells him that she has no trouble believing everything he just described is true. She believes he turned himself into a pickle. She believes he fought through a sewer and a government building. She believes all of it. And she says that his ability to do these things, to survive and adapt and overcome any physical challenge put in front of him, is not in question. What she is interested in is why. She explains it plainly. Rick has every resource available to him. He has intelligence that goes beyond anything most people can even picture. He could use that to fix his family, to repair his relationships, to become someone his children and grandchildren do not have to recover from. He chooses not to, because solving a problem like a leaking pipe or a car engine or an enemy soldier gives him something he can control, something with a clear solution, something he can be definitively right about. And the work of being a better person, of sitting with his family and being honest about what he has done to them, offers none of those things. There is no guaranteed win. There is only the possibility of being seen clearly and found lacking. So he turns himself into a pickle instead. Doctor. Wong does not say this to be cruel. She is not scoring points. She is doing her job, which is to identify what is actually happening beneath the surface of the behavior she is observing. And what is actually happening is that Rick Sanchez, who can build universes and fight armies, is terrified of a conversation. Rick sits there. He does not argue. He does not pull out a device that proves she is wrong. He does not make a joke or change the subject or find a backdoor out of the moment the way he finds backdoors out of every other situation. He just sits there and takes it, and the camera stays on him, and the show does not add music to tell you how to feel about it. This is the most significant part of the entire episode. Not the pickle transformation, as funny and creative as it is. Not the sewer fight, as impressive as that is. The most significant part is that 30-second stretch where Rick Sanchez has nothing to say. It is the longest silence Rick produces in the entire series up to this point. Beth is in the room for this. She hears everything Dr. Wong says, and what she does with it is heartbreaking in its own way. She uses it to feel closer to her father, rather than to see him more clearly. She hears Dr. Wong describe a person who uses intelligence and achievement to avoid emotional honesty, and she recognizes that person, and she recognizes it because she does the same thing. Rather than looking at Rick and thinking this man has been damaging my life for years, she looks at Rick and thinks, we are the same. The therapy session ends with Rick and Beth feeling bonded, and Morty and Summer sitting quietly in the corner having received essentially nothing. Dr. Wong points this out too. She notes that the session has strengthened the relationship between the two people in the room who needed it least, Rick and Beth, while the two people who came in with the most damage have been pushed further to the edges. This is what Rick does to every space he occupies. He takes up the room. The people around him get whatever is left. Rick and Beth leave therapy feeling good about each other. This feeling will last for a while. Then things will go back to the way they were, because nothing that needed to change actually changed. Rick did not make a decision to be different. He did not decide to show up differently for his family. He sat through a therapy session against his will, heard an accurate description of himself, and then walked out of the building with his daughter feeling like something had been resolved. Nothing was resolved. The decision this section is named after, the decision to turn himself into a pickle, is the most visible version of a decision Rick makes constantly, in smaller ways, in every episode. It is always easier to fight something than to feel something. It is always more comfortable to solve a problem in the external world than to look honestly at what you are doing to the people around you. Rick is so extraordinarily good at external problem solving that he has built a life life where he never has to do anything else, and his intelligence is so overwhelming that he can almost always make his avoidance look like something else, like humor, or efficiency, or forward motion. The pickle is just the most honest version of this. It is Rick's avoidance turned into a physical object. He looked at the prospect of an hour of honest conversation and turned himself into a vegetable to escape it. And the transformation required more skill, more effort, and more genuine creative work than almost anything else he does in the episode. He worked harder to avoid therapy than therapy would have asked him to work. That is what makes it not just funny, but devastating once you see it clearly. Think about what the episode is actually showing you. Rick fights through a sewer. He fights through a government building. He defeats trained soldiers and security systems and physical conditions that would kill almost anyone else. He does all of this as a pickle with no arms. And then he sits in a room with a woman who is not threatening him, not armed, not trying to harm him in any way, and he has nothing. He is completely still because she is not asking him to fight. She is asking him to be honest, and there is no suit of rat bones he can build for that. The antidote to the pickle transformation is the right image for what Dr. Wong is offering him. The syringe that would turn him back into a person, his actual self, his real form, is the therapy itself. Beth had it in her purse the whole time. It was available the whole time. Rick just had to ask for it. He never does. He finds another way home, another workaround, another path that lets him avoid the direct route. He is still a pickle at the end, in everything that matters. There is a version of this story where Rick walks out of therapy changed, where the 30 seconds of silence turn into something, an admission, an apology, a decision to try differently. The show does not give you that version, and it is not being lazy by refusing to. It is being honest. People do not change because someone describes them accurately. They change because they decide to, and Rick has not decided to. He has heard the truth about himself from a room full of people who were not wrong, and he has chosen to go home. The family will be back in therapy again eventually. The problems Dr. Wong identified will still be there, still growing, still shaping Summer and Morty in ways that will take years to fully surface. Rick will continue to be the gravitational center of a family that cannot escape his orbit, and the pickle, the glorious, ridiculous, genuinely impressive pickle, will become a cultural symbol for something that has nothing to do with what the episode is really about. People will put it on t-shirts. They will quote it at each other. The meme version of Pickle Rick is pure triumph, a genius declaring himself in the most chaotic possible way. The episode version of Pickle Rick is a man who would rather be a vegetable than be known. Rick made a lot of bad decisions to get through this one Thursday morning. He made the device to transform himself. He chose not to attend. He built a rat-bone suit in a sewer and fought through a government building instead of sitting in a chair. But the worst decision, the one that cost the most, the one that nobody talks about, is the one he makes at the end of the session when he has a real opening, a real moment, a real chance to let something change. He decides not to take it. He walks out with Beth and they talk about how similar they are, and the morning sun is out and it almost feels like everything might be okay. __quote_2_Rick refuses to be honest about who he is when there are people waiting to listen. But there is something even darker underneath that refusal. A habit that goes beyond avoiding therapy, beyond avoiding consequences, beyond anything Dr. Wong could have uncovered in a single session. Rick has been quietly editing what Morty is allowed to remember. Not just traumatic things, not just dangerous things, anything that makes Rick look human. Section 4. Erasing Morty's memories. Without consent. There is a room in Rick's house that Morty does not know exists. It is hidden behind a secret panel, accessible only to Rick, and it is filled, floor to ceiling, with small glass vials. Each vial contains a memory. Not a recording of a memory, the actual memory itself, physically extracted from Morty's brain while he was unconscious, or distracted, or simply trusting enough not to ask what Rick was doing near his head with a device. Hundreds of vials, maybe more, stacked and sorted and labeled in a room that Morty has walked past countless times without knowing what was on the other side of the wall. Rick calls them Morty's Mind Blowers. Season 3, Episode 8 is structured as an anthology episode, a collection of short stories rather than one continuous plot. And it begins with Rick bringing Morty into this room and showing it to him. He presents it almost proudly, the way someone might show off a collection they have been building for years. He explains that these are memories Morty asked to have removed, experiences so traumatic, so difficult, so far beyond what a 14-year-old should have to carry, that Morty came to Rick and said, "Please take this out of my head." This is the first explanation. It sounds almost reasonable. Morty has been through things that would break most adults. If he asked for help managing that, and Rick helped him manage it, that is at least something. Then you notice the colors. The vials are not all the same. Most of them are blue. And blue, Rick confirms, confirms, are the memories Morty asked to have removed, but some of them are red. And red, it turns out, means something different. Red vials are memories Rick removed without asking, without telling Morty, without Morty's knowledge or agreement. Red vials are memories that Rick took because he wanted them gone, not because Morty needed them gone. Morty opens the first red vial. He sees a memory of himself at school, pointing a telescope at the moon, and becoming convinced that the shadowy figure he can see on the surface is a man, a real person, living on the moon, who needs help. Summer, who is with him, suggests that it is probably just a smudge on the lens. Morty insists. He is certain. He campaigns aggressively for this man on the moon, telling everyone, demanding action, making enough noise that people start to listen. Eventually, the situation spirals badly enough that the man whose window Morty has been looking at, a man who just lives near the school, a regular person, a man with a family, is driven to take his own life because the attention and pressure become too much. There was no man on the moon. Summer was right. It was a smudge on the lens. This is a genuinely devastating memory, and it is in the blue pile, the memories Morty asked to have removed. That makes sense. Morty drove an innocent person to their death because he would not listen to his sister, and he could not live with that. Rick took it out so Morty could keep functioning. This is, in context, one of the more defensible things Rick has ever done. Then, Morty opens a red vial. He sees Rick standing in front of a sign, reading it with complete confidence, and announcing that the phrase everyone uses is not taken for granted, but taken for granite, as in the rock. Rick believes for a moment, on camera, in front of Morty, that a very common saying is about a type of stone. Morty corrects him. Rick is wrong. This lasts about 4 seconds. Rick removed this memory from Morty's mind. He extracted it, bottled it, stored it in a hidden room, because a 4-second moment where he misunderstood a phrase threatened the image he works constantly to maintain. The image of someone who does not make mistakes, who is always right, who knows more than everyone, in every room, at every moment. He could not allow Morty to hold on to the information that Rick once confused a word, so he reached into Morty's brain without asking and took it out. The red vials are full of things like this. Small moments, stupid moments. Moments where Rick looked foolish, or got something wrong, or was caught being human. Not dangerous memories, not traumatic ones, just moments where the gap between how Rick presents himself and what Rick actually is became visible for a second. Every time that happened, Rick erased the evidence from the one person who was there to see it. Think about what this means for Morty's understanding of reality. Morty has spent his time with Rick believing, on some level, that Rick is as extraordinary as Rick claims to be. He has seen Rick be wrong, or he has been in the room when Rick was wrong, but he does not remember those moments because they were taken from him. His experience of Rick has been quietly edited to remove the parts that would complicate the picture. He has been living with a version of Rick that only exists because the real version kept cleaning up the footage. Rick has been doing this for so long and so consistently that there is an established backup procedure for when things go wrong in the mind blower room. When Morty discovers the red vials and confronts Rick, the two of them argue so intensely that they both accidentally get their memories wiped at the same time. They are both standing there with no idea who they are or where they are or what is happening. Morty, with no memory of himself, looks around the room and tries to figure out his own life from context clues. He finds the vials. He finds evidence of their adventures. He pieces together, slowly, and without any specific memories to guide him, a general shape of what his existence looks like. And what he concludes, before Summer comes downstairs and resets both of them with a procedure Rick clearly built specifically for this situation, is that whoever he is controlled by someone else. That his life is not his own. That some other person has been making decisions about what he gets to know and remember and understand about himself. He decides, in that moment, that his life might not be worth living. Summer resets them both before anything happens. They sit back down on the couch. The episode ends with them watching television, neither of them remembering what just took place in the hidden room, and Rick telling Morty calmly that they are going to do this instead of the interdimensional cable episode this season. Everything goes back to normal. The room is still there, the vials are still there, the red ones are still red. What makes this decision so specifically horrible is the gap between what Rick says his reasons are and what his reasons actually are. If you asked Rick, if you cornered him and made him account for the red vials, he would probably frame it as a form of care. He would say that Morty cannot handle certain information, that protecting Morty's mental stability requires managing what Morty carries around, that this is just another form of maintenance, like fixing the ship or replacing a battery. He would make it sound like something he does for Morty rather than to him. But the memory of the word granite is not something Morty needed protection from. The memory of Rick being wrong about a phrase is not traumatic. It is not dangerous. It is not something that would have broken Morty or destabilized him or made him unable to function. It is just something that would have made Morty see Rick slightly more accurately. And that, the accurate picture, is what Rick cannot allow. Rick's relationship with his own image is one of the most consistent threads in the entire show. He performs not caring. He performs indifference to what people think of him. He says constantly that he does not need validation, that he is beyond caring about how he looks to others, that the opinions of lesser minds mean nothing to someone operating at his level. And then he reaches into his grandson's brain and removes a 4-second memory of a vocabulary mistake. The performance and the behavior are telling completely different stories. Morty is not the only person Rick treats this way. He manages and manipulates the people around him constantly, in ways large and small. But the mind blower room is the most literal version of this, the most undeniable, because it is physical evidence stored in glass containers in a room with a hidden door. Rick did not just do this once in a moment of weakness. He built an entire system for it. He made a room. He organized the vials. He created a reset protocol for when things go wrong. This is not impulsive behavior. This is infrastructure. He has been running this operation for years. What the red vials also reveal is something about how Rick sees the relationship between himself and Morty at its foundation. Morty believes, most of the time, that he and Rick are partners. Unequal partners, certainly, with Rick clearly in charge, but partners nonetheless. Two people who go through things together and share the experience of what happens. The red vials say something different. They say that Rick has always seen Morty as a subject, someone whose experience of reality Rick is entitled to shape according to Rick's own preferences. Morty does not get to decide what he remembers about Rick. Rick decides that. Morty does not get to carry the full picture of who Rick is. Rick manages the picture. The blue vials are defensible. Painful, but defensible. Morty asked for those. Morty, overwhelmed by things no teenager should have to carry, came to Rick and said, "Help me." And Rick helped him in the most literal way he could. There is something almost tender about the blue vials when you look at them next to the red ones. They are the moments when Rick acknowledged that Morty was hurting and did something about it. The red vials are the moments when Rick acknowledged that he was hurting, his image, his ego, his carefully maintained reputation, and did something about that instead. The episode does not tell you how many red vials there are. You see a handful, but the room is full, and they are not all blue, and Rick has had years to fill them. Every time Rick made an error in front of Morty, every time Rick was caught being wrong, every time the mask slipped for a second, and the person underneath, confused, fallible, uncertain, showed through, gone, bottled, stored behind a hidden door that Morty will never find again because he does not remember finding it the first time. This is the decision the section is about, not any single removal. The decision to build the room. The decision to establish a system. The decision to look at your relationship with the person you spend most of your time with and conclude that the relationship only works if that person is not allowed to see you clearly. Rick loves Morty. This is something the show makes genuinely clear across its run, in moments that are hard to fake and harder to explain away. He loves Morty, and he has built a hidden room in his house full of stolen memories specifically to make sure Morty cannot love him back with full information. That is not protection. That is control dressed up as protection, which is a different thing entirely, and the show knows the difference, even when Rick does not. The reset button Summer uses at the end, the emergency procedure built into the room itself, is the final detail that makes all of this land fully. Rick anticipated that this could go wrong. He built the failsafe. He prepared for the possibility that Morty would find out, or that the system would break down, or that both of them would end up memory wiped in a room full of stolen glass vials. He planned for it. He planned for it and kept doing it anyway. Rick erases the moments that make him look human because he cannot afford for Morty to see him as anything less than extraordinary. But there is a decision that goes even further than this. One where Rick does not just erase a memory to protect his image, but builds an entire device specifically to punish Morty for disagreeing with him. And the punishment costs more than anyone in the room understood was possible. Section 5. The Save Point Device. A lesson paid in Dead Mortys. It starts with a disagreement about a vat of fake acid. Rick and Morty are at an alien facility doing a crystal exchange with a group of gangsters. The deal goes wrong, as deals in this show tend to go, and Rick's backup plan kicks in. He grabs Morty and jumps into a large vat sitting nearby, pulling Morty in with him. The vat looks like it contains acid. It does not. Rick prepared it in advance, filled it with a fake substance, and planted fake bones at the bottom so that anyone looking in would assume the two of them dissolved. The gangsters peer over the edge, see the bones, have a brief emotional conversation about what they just witnessed, and eventually leave. Rick and Morty climb out. Morty is furious. He tells Rick the vat of acid plan is stupid. It is complicated. It requires advanced preparation. It depends depends on the gangsters not testing the liquid, which they almost do, and it ends with Rick killing all of them anyway once Morty loses patience waiting at the bottom. Rick had weapons the entire time. He could have ended the situation in seconds. Instead, he built an elaborate fake death contraption and dragged his grandson into a vat of fake acid for a plan that barely worked and required backup violence to finish. Morty says all of this. He is not wrong about any of it. Rick takes this personally, in a way that goes far beyond what the moment calls for. Something about being told his plan was stupid, by Morty specifically, by the person whose opinion should matter least to someone who claims not to care about anyone's opinion, gets under his skin in a way he cannot shake. He does not argue back effectively. He does not prove Morty wrong with logic. He stews. On the way home, Morty pushes further. He tells Rick about an idea he has had for a long time, a device that works like a save point in a video game. In games, you can save your progress at a certain moment and then go back to that exact moment if things go wrong, erasing whatever happened in between. Morty wants this in real life. He wants to be able to try things, make choices, take risks, and then reset back to a fixed point if the consequences get too bad. He is clear that this is not time travel. He is not asking to go back in time just to reload a saved position the way a game lets you do. Rick says he already knows about this idea. He points out that a show called Futurama did it already. He refuses to build it. Morty pushes harder, eventually taunting Rick about being unable to do it, which is the one button that reliably gets Rick moving on any project. Rick builds the device. He hands it to Morty. He offers to explain how it works. Morty does not wait for the explanation. He takes the remote and walks away to go have fun with it. This is the last genuinely free choice Morty makes in the episode. Everything that follows happens because Rick built something he knew would cause enormous harm, built it out of spite, built it to prove a point, and handed it to a 14-year-old without explaining what it actually did. Morty uses the save point constantly. He commits small crimes, he pranks people, he does things a teenager would do if they believe there were no consequences, goes into spaces he should not go into, says things he should not say, resets back before anyone can be upset about it. The episode shows this as a quick, funny sequence. Morty is having the time of his life. Then he falls in love. He saves a point just before approaching a girl he notices going into a coffee shop. He talks to her. It goes well. He saves another point. They go on a date. Something about her clicks with him in a way that Jessica, his long-running crush, never quite has. He decides not to reset this one. He lets it keep going. What follows is the most quietly devastating sequence in the episode. Morty and this girl, she is never named, build a real relationship. It has the texture of something genuine. There are arguments and repairs, awkward moments and good ones, ordinary time spent together that does not go anywhere dramatic. The show presents this without dialogue, set to a song, in a montage that covers what feels like months. Morty is happy in a way he rarely gets to be. Then they are on a plane together, and the plane goes down. There is a crash. They survive it, along with 2 other passengers, in a remote area. The situation is desperate. There is a button on the remote, the reset button, the save point loader, and Morty has it in his hand. He could press it right now, and none of this would have happened. He and the girl would be back at the coffee shop. Her walking in, him deciding whether to approach her. The crash would be gone. Morty does not press it. He decides that what he has with this girl is real enough to fight for, that the relationship they have built is worth preserving, that pressing the button would erase something that matters. He chooses the harder path. He chooses consequences. Then Jerry, his father, who is at home, who is in no way part of this situation, accidentally picks up the device while looking for a television remote. He presses the button. Everything Morty chose to keep is gone. The girl, the relationship, the months of genuine happiness, all of it erased by an accident, by a man who did not know what he was holding. Because Rick built a life-altering device and left it in a house with a family who had no idea what it was. Morty comes back from the reload devastated. He is standing at the coffee shop moment again. The girl walks past. He does not approach her. He cannot explain to anyone what he lost, because as far as anyone else is concerned, nothing happened. He goes back to Rick. He tells Rick he has learned something. He says he understands now that consequences are what give choices their meaning, that living without consequences is not actually living, that the ability to undo everything makes everything feel like nothing. It is a genuine realization, arrived at through genuine pain, and Morty delivers it with the quiet certainty of someone who has been through something. Rick listens to the whole speech. Then he tells Morty he is wrong. He tells Morty there were definitely consequences. And then he shows Morty what the device actually does. It was never a save point. Rick does not do time travel. He has said this clearly and repeatedly throughout the show, and he means it. And the device does not use time travel. What it does instead is jump Morty into an alternate dimension at the moment of the save point. A dimension that is almost identical to the original one, except that the Morty who was living there is removed, killed. killed so that this Morty can take his place. Every time Morty pressed the button, he did not erase what he had done. He moved to a new dimension where it had not happened yet, and the Morty who was living in that dimension died to make room. Every reset, every reload, every time Morty decided he did not like how something went and pressed the button, a version of himself was killed. The crimes were not undone, the pranks were not erased. They all happened in different dimensions to different people who then had to live with the consequences of choices that were not theirs. Morty is horrified. He asks Rick to fix it. Rick offers a solution. He can merge all the affected dimensions back together into one, which will undo the deaths of the alternate Mortys. Morty agrees immediately. He would do anything to undo this. Rick merges the dimensions. This means that every single person from every dimension Morty cycled through, everyone who knew about his crimes, everyone who was affected by his pranks, everyone who watched what Morty did in their dimension, is now in the same place. They all remember. They all know where he lives. They descend on the Smith house in an enormous, furious crowd. Rick surveys this situation. He surveys the mob. He looks at Morty, and then he presents the only exit he is willing to offer. There is a vat of fake acid. If Morty jumps in, he can fake his death, the mob will disperse, and they can go home. The same plan. The same stupid, complicated, barely functional plan that started this entire chain of events. Rick makes Morty acknowledge, out loud, that the vat is a good idea. He makes him say it clearly. Then he makes Morty kiss the vat before getting in. Rick was not trying to teach Morty a lesson about consequences. The lesson was a side effect. What Rick was actually doing, what the episode is built around, what the writers of this episode confirmed in interviews, was constructing an elaborate, dimension-spanning machine of punishment because Morty said his fake acid plan was stupid. Everything that happened, the alternate Mortys dying, the girl and the relationship being erased, Morty's realization and his pain and his grief, all of it was the scaffolding around Rick's need to hear Morty admit he was wrong about the vat. Rick built a device that killed thousands of alternate versions of his own grandson in order to win an argument. He then reveals, almost as a footnote, that they have been in an alternate dimension this entire time. He did not want to mess up their home dimension just to make his point. He was careful enough about the consequences to protect the dimension he actually lives in while destroying the Mortys and all the other ones. He moved them deliberately to a dimension where all of this could happen to someone else's Morty instead. He adds, on the way out, that the dimension they just wrecked was actually quite nice. Johnny Carson was still alive and on television here. The September 11th attacks never happened in this version of Earth. Rocky Road ice cream had peanut butter instead of marshmallows. It was a good dimension. Rick trashed it because Morty did not like his vat. This episode won an Emmy Award for Best Animated Program. It beat other nominees by doing something that animated shows almost never do. It used the structure of a comedy to deliver a genuinely ugly portrait of what cruelty looks like when it comes from someone intelligent enough to dress it up as a lesson, because that is the final, most important thing about this decision. Rick did not tell Morty the device would kill alternate versions of himself. He did not warn Morty about what was happening. He watched Morty use the device, watched the alternate Mortys die, watched Morty fall in love and lose the person he loved, and grieve and grow and arrive at a real understanding, and said nothing. He let all of it happen. And then, when Morty had finished arriving at his own conclusions, Rick stepped in to tell him he was wrong and reveal the truth. Rick did not give Morty the lesson. He manufactured the conditions for the lesson and then took credit for it. The lesson cost thousands of lives and one genuine love story, and an unknown number of innocent people in alternate dimensions who watched Morty commit crimes and then had to live in the merged dimension, knowing the person responsible is somewhere out there, celebrated and unpunished. The vat gets kissed, they go home. Rick seems satisfied. Morty sits in the passenger seat of the ship that runs on a civilization of enslaved people and says nothing. The episode ends. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rick will hurt Morty to protect his ego. He will hurt thousands of alternate Mortys to win an argument. But there is a category of decision that is different from all of these. One where the person Rick hurts most is not Morty, not a stranger, not a civilization inside a battery. The next section is about Beth, and what Rick does to his own daughter when she asks him the one question he cannot answer honestly is the most cowardly thing in this entire list. Section 6. Cloning Beth and wiping his own memory of which is real. There is a question Beth Smith has been carrying her entire life. It is not a complicated question. It is actually one of the simplest questions a child can ask about a parent. It is, do you want me here? Not in a dramatic way, not as a cry for help, but as a genuine and honest inquiry from a daughter to her father. Do you actually want me in your life? Or am I just something that happened to you that you have been tolerating ever since? sense. Beth has never been able to ask this directly. The whole shape of her relationship with Rick makes it nearly impossible. Rick left when she was young. He was absent for years. The exact number shifts depending on which part of the show you are watching, but the core fact is consistent. Rick was not there for most of Beth's childhood, and then one day he came back and moved into the garage. And Beth has spent every day since trying to be worthy of a father who never made her feel fully worthy of anything. She is a horse surgeon. She is brilliant and capable and deeply unhappy in ways she has spent years refusing to look at directly. Her marriage to Jerry has been strained for most of the show's run. Rick contributed significantly to that strain, which is covered in the next section. Her children are growing up in a household defined by the chaos Rick introduces and the instability that follows him everywhere. And Beth, at the center of all of this, has built her self-worth almost entirely around one thing: being the daughter of the smartest man in the universe. If Rick thinks she is worth keeping around, she must be. That is the math she has been running. Season 3, Episode 9, titled The ABCs of Beth, forces the question into the open. Beth and Rick have a confrontation in this episode about Beth's patterns of behavior, her tendency to avoid accountability, her habit of blaming other people for outcomes that she helped create. Rick, in a rare moment of genuine directness, agrees that he is a terrible father and a bad person, but points out that Beth is performing the same patterns he does, avoiding, deflecting, refusing to look honestly at what she has become, with the key difference that Rick at least knows what he is. Beth, he argues, does not yet know what she is, and until she figures that out, she will keep making the same choices in the same loops forever. Then Rick offers her something extraordinary. He tells her he can clone her. He can create a perfect copy of Beth, identical in every way, indistinguishable from the original, and that copy can stay here with the family. Jerry will not know, the kids will not know. Nobody will be able to tell the difference because there will not be a difference. The real Beth can go out into the universe and do whatever she wants, become whatever she wants, live whatever life she has been too afraid to chase while trapped in the role of wife and mother and daughter. When she comes back, if she comes back, they can figure out the rest. This offer is either the most generous thing Rick has ever done or the most destructive, and the show is smart enough to let it be both at the same time. Beth cannot decide. This is the part that matters. She stands in front of the most consequential choice of her life and finds that she does not know what she wants, which is itself the answer to a question she has been avoiding for years. A person who knew what she wanted would not need to think this long, but Beth has spent so long arranging her life around other people's needs, Rick's approval, Jerry's love, her children's stability, that she has no clear idea what is left when she removes all of that. So she does something that seems reasonable in the moment and is actually catastrophic. She gives the decision back to Rick. She tells her father that she cannot choose and that she wants him to decide. She frames it as a question about whether Rick wants her in his life. Do you want the real me here, or is the clone good enough? It is the most direct version of that lifelong question she has ever managed to ask him. If Rick says, "I want you here," the real you, then she stays. If he says go, then maybe she goes. Either way, someone has finally answered the question. Rick hears this. He understands exactly what she is asking. And then he does what Rick does when faced with a genuine emotional obligation that he cannot think his way out of. He finds a workaround. He clones Beth. He plants small devices, the show confirms these are bombs, in both versions of Beth, the original and the clone. He sends both of them out into their lives without telling either one what he has done or which one she is. And then he erases his own memory of who is the original. He removes the information from his own brain so that he genuinely does not know which Beth is the real one. This way, if anyone ever asks him, including himself, he cannot answer. He has made the answer impossible. He has turned Beth's question, the one she finally worked up the courage to ask out loud, into a question that now has no answer available anywhere in the universe, because the one person who knew has deliberately made himself not know. This is what Rick does when something is too hard. He does not face it. He does not refuse to answer and own that refusal. He engineers a situation in which the answer becomes structurally unavailable, so that his failure to provide it looks like a circumstance rather than a choice. The bombs in both Beths are the detail that stays with you. Rick clones his daughter, sends two versions of her into the world without their knowledge or consent, and installs explosive devices in both of them. The show reveals this in Season 4, Episode 10, Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry, when both versions of Beth end up in the same place for the first time, and the situation becomes impossible to contain. Rick, when confronted confronted with what he has done, has no explanation that holds up. He watches a recording of himself from the period when he made these decisions, a recording he left behind before wiping his own memory, and sees his own behavior from the outside for what might be the first time. The recording shows a man who is frightened, not of Beth, not of the clone, frightened of the answer to her question, frightened that if he says, "I want you here, the real you," he becomes vulnerable in a way he cannot control. He becomes a father who needs his daughter, and needing people is the thing Rick has spent his entire adult life constructing armor against. And if he says go, he might lose her permanently, which is a different kind of unbearable. So he built a system that let him avoid both outcomes. Both versions of Beth end up surviving the events of that episode. Rick frees them. He does fight for them, which is important because Rick's love for Beth is real, even when his behavior is unforgivable. But what happens at the end of that episode is the part that matters most. Both Beths, standing next to each other, having just learned what Rick did, that he cloned them, bombed them, and then erased his own memory to avoid answering a question, decide together that they do not want to know which one is the original. Not because it does not matter, but because what Rick did made the question feel dirty. He took something Beth needed, clarity about her father, clarity about her own identity, and turned it into a problem he could manage rather than a person he could be honest with. Both Beths in the episode so disgusted by what Rick's decision-making has done to their lives that they want no part of the machinery of it. They reject the question because Rick made the question into a trap. They also both, by the end, share a dislike of Rick that they did not have before. Rick watches the recording of himself and recognizes what he is seeing. The show is quiet about this moment. It does not over-explain it, does not have Rick deliver a speech about what he understands now. He just watches. And you can see in the way the scene is framed that he is looking at evidence of his own cowardice, the same way someone might look at footage of themselves doing something they cannot justify. He knows what the recording shows. He knows why he made those choices. He cannot make them make sense even to himself. What the cloning decision reveals about Rick is something slightly different from what the microverse or the save point device revealed. Those decisions were about convenience and ego. This one is about fear. Specifically, the fear of being needed by someone in a way that you might fail to meet. Rick can handle being needed as a scientist, needed for solutions, for inventions, for plans. Those needs have clear endpoints. You either fix the problem or you do not. And if you do not, you can move to the next dimension. Being needed as a father is different. Being needed as the person whose answer to a question determines whether your daughter stays or goes, that is a need with no clear endpoint, no technical solution, no dimension to jump to if you get it wrong. Rick responded to that fear by making the answer impossible to give. By wiping his own memory, he turned his failure into a condition. By bombing both Beths, he made sure he had leverage over a situation he could not control emotionally. By never telling either Beth what she was, he made sure that neither of them could fully settle into her own life, which meant both of them remained, in some sense, unresolved. And unresolved things have a way of coming back. Beth came back. Both of them did. And Rick saved them, which is true and matters, but saving someone from a danger you created is not the same as not creating the danger. Rick is frequently very good at the rescue and very bad at the original decision that made the rescue necessary. The question Beth asked, "Do you want me here?" never gets a clean answer. The show allows this ambiguity to persist because the show understands something true about people like Rick. The love is real and the cowardice is real, and those two things can exist in the same person at the same time without canceling each other out. Rick loves Beth. He also could not say so when it mattered, in the way it mattered, without a safety net built underneath the admission. He built the safety net instead of saying the thing. The bombs went in both daughters. The memory came out of his own head. And somewhere out in the universe, two versions of Beth Smith are living their lives without knowing which one started out real, because their father decided that not knowing was easier than being honest. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rick cannot answer his daughter's most important question without building an escape route first. But as damaging as the cloning decision is, it at least came from somewhere complicated, from fear, from love, from a man unable to hold both things at once. The next section is about a decision that came from somewhere much simpler and much uglier. It came from spite, and the people it hurt most were not Rick and not Beth. They were two children who had nothing to do with the argument that started it. Section 7. Deliberately engineering Jerry and Beth's divorce. There is a moment in Season 3 where Rick comes home from prison and destroys his daughter's marriage before dinner. He does not do it loudly. He does not do it with a weapon or a device or anything that would show up on a scanner. He does it with words, carefully chosen, delivered to a woman he knows better than almost anyone. A woman whose specific specific fears and specific wounds he has spent decades observing, and he walks away from the conversation having lit a fire that will burn for the better part of 2 seasons. To understand why Rick does this, you have to understand what put him in prison in the first place, and what happened while he was there. At the end of Season 2, Rick turns himself in to the Galactic Federation, an enormous intergalactic government that has been trying to capture him for years. He does this to protect his family. The Federation has them cornered, and Rick makes a calculation. If he surrenders, they leave the Smiths alone. He goes willingly. The last image of the Season 2 finale is Rick being led away in handcuffs, looking back at his family, and the family watching him go. It is one of the more genuinely affecting moments in the show's first 2 seasons, because it looks, briefly, like Rick choosing someone else over himself. Season 3 begins with Rick in a Federation prison, and it becomes clear very quickly that his plan is already in motion. He is not simply surrendered. He is surrendered as the first move in a much longer game. And what follows over the course of the Season 3 premiere is Rick dismantling the Galactic Federation from the inside, manipulating the prison, manipulating the people around him, engineering a collapse of the entire organization using nothing but his brain and an extremely long chain of cause and effect. By the end of the episode, the Federation has fallen. Rick is free. He comes home. While Rick was in prison, the family was trying to survive without him. And in that survival, something interesting happened to Jerry. Jerry, for perhaps the first time in the show's run, had some ground to stand on. Rick was not in the house. The constant low-grade humiliation that Rick delivers to Jerry, the comments, the looks, the suggestions that Jerry is stupid and useless and an embarrassment, was absent. Without that, Jerry had room to exist. The family was under stress from the Federation's presence, but the particular stress of being Rick's son-in-law, of being made to feel small every single day in your own home, was temporarily lifted. Jerry suggested, at some point during this period, that Rick should turn himself in. He said it as a reasonable position. Rick's presence endangers the family. The Federation wants Rick specifically. Without Rick, the family might be safer. This is not an unreasonable argument. It is actually a fairly logical one, and it comes from a place of genuine concern for Beth and the children, rather than from hostility toward Rick. Rick finds out about this suggestion. He does not forget it. When Rick comes home from dismantling the Galactic Federation, when he walks back into the house having just personally collapsed an interstellar government that had held power for generations, he does not walk in with gratitude or relief or any of the warmth you might expect from someone returning to the family he supposedly surrendered himself to protect. He walks in with an agenda. He finds Beth. He sits with her, and he begins to talk. What Rick says to Beth in this conversation is not shown fully on screen. The show is smart enough to let you infer most of it from the outcome, but the shape of it is clear. He talks to Beth about her life, about who she is versus who she could be, about whether the choices she has made, marrying Jerry, staying in this house, building this particular life, reflect what she actually wants, or whether they reflect the fears of a younger version of herself who did not know what she was capable of. He holds up a mirror to Beth's dissatisfaction, and he holds it up with the precision of someone who has been watching her carry that dissatisfaction for decades and knows exactly which angle will make it look largest. Beth and Jerry's marriage ends. The divorce plays out over the course of Season 3. The kids, Morty and Summer, are caught in the middle of it, in the way that children always are when parents separate, which is to say, badly. Summer in particular takes it hard. She has watched her family function as a unit, however imperfectly, and the collapse of that unit hits her with a force that the show takes seriously. Morty carries his own version of this, quieter but present. The show does not present the divorce as entirely Rick's fault. Beth had real dissatisfactions, real questions about her life, and those were not manufactured by Rick. They were already there. What Rick did was not plant a feeling that did not exist. What Rick did was identify a feeling that was already present in a vulnerable person at a moment when she was without other support and use it as a lever. This is a distinction that matters, and the show is careful about it. Beth's unhappiness with her life is real. Her doubts about Jerry are real. Rick did not invent these things. What he did was choose to surface them at the specific moment that would cause the specific outcome he wanted, which was Jerry out of the house and Rick back in without having to compete for space or authority or Beth's attention. The timing is everything. Rick comes home, the day he comes home, fresh from collapsing a galactic government, and the first substantial thing he does is have a conversation designed to end his son-in-law's marriage. He has been in prison. He has just performed one of the most impressive feats of individual intelligence the show has ever depicted, and his first move back in the house is a targeted conversation with his daughter about whether Jerry deserves her. Later, in Season 3, Episode 5, titled The Whirly hurly-durly conspiracy, Rick takes Jerry on an adventure. Just the two of them, no Morty, no Beth. It is framed as a sympathy gesture. Rick doing something nice for a man who is struggling after his marriage ended. The episode is not entirely that, but it contains a conversation between Rick and Jerry that is one of the most honest exchanges in the show's run. Rick tells Jerry directly that impregnating his daughter is only part of why he cannot stand him. The rest, he explains, is something he actually recognizes because he sees it in himself. Jerry, Rick says, ruins other people's lives for his own benefit. The difference between Rick and Jerry, in Rick's framing, is that Rick is upfront about what he is. When Rick uses people, he does not pretend he is not using them. Jerry manipulates people into pitying him, into lowering their expectations of him, into protecting him from consequences. And then he benefits from all of that while maintaining the appearance of being a decent person who just has bad luck. Rick finds this more offensive than his own behavior. He would rather be openly terrible than covertly terrible. This is a position Rick holds genuinely, and it is not entirely without logic, but it is also convenient because it lets Rick reframe his own behavior as a kind of honesty while dismissing Jerry's behavior as a kind of deception. Rick broke up a marriage and destabilized 2 children, and he is sitting across from the man whose life he helped dismantle, explaining to him why Jerry is actually the worse person. Jerry, to his credit in this moment, hears it. The episode ends with Jerry making a small internal decision that he will stop using pity as a tool to get what he wants. It is a quiet moment of genuine growth for a character the show often uses as a punching bag, and it lands because it is earned rather than announced. But the conversation happening in that episode, with those 2 people, about those dynamics, it only exists because Rick chose to engineer a divorce. Jerry would not be at an alien resort struggling through the aftermath of his marriage ending if Rick had made a different choice on the day he came home. Those 2 people are sitting across from each other in that alien restaurant because Rick decided, the moment he walked back through the front door, that the marriage needed to end. The show eventually acknowledges this more directly. Rick, at a later point, admits in his own terms that what he did was deliberate. He does not frame it as a great wrong. Rick rarely frames his own actions as great wrongs, but he does not pretend it was accidental or that he was simply sharing his honest observations with his daughter. He knows what he did and why. What makes this particular decision worth examining at length is what it says about the specific shape of Rick's cruelty. Rick is not random. He is not chaotic in the way that the show's surface energy sometimes suggests. When Rick hurts people, he hurts them with precision. He identified exactly what Jerry had: a wife who had doubts, children who needed stability, a position in the family that was always uncertain, and he applied pressure to exactly the right point. He did not yell at Jerry. He did not humiliate him in front of the family. He had a quiet conversation with Beth. That is more calculated than anything Rick does with a weapon. Jerry's crime, in Rick's framing, was suggesting that Rick turn himself in. That is the thing Rick is punishing him for. A reasonable suggestion made by a man trying to protect his family gets repaid with the end of his marriage and years of struggling to rebuild a life after losing the structure he had organized himself around. The punishment is so wildly disproportionate to the offense that it stops being readable as anger and starts being readable as something else, as Rick establishing, once and for all, what happens to people who suggest that Rick should face consequences. This connects to something the show builds carefully across its run. Rick has an extremely specific reaction to any suggestion that he should be accountable for what he does. It is not anger exactly, though anger is part of it. It is more like a reflex, an immediate, overwhelming need to make the person who suggested accountability understand that the suggestion itself has a cost. Jerry suggested it openly, out loud, with Beth present. Rick filed it away and waited for the right moment to make the cost clear. Morty and Summer are the people who pay most of what that cost amounts to. They are the ones who wake up one morning in a home that has 2 parents and go to sleep that night in a home that does not. They are the ones who have to navigate Christmas and school events and ordinary dinners in the new configuration Rick's conversation created. Neither of them asked to be part of this. Neither of them did anything that contributed to it. They are collateral, in the specific way that children of difficult adults are always collateral, present in the damage zone through no fault of their own, shaped by consequences that originated in decisions they had no part in making. Rick does not ignore this. The show does not let him ignore it entirely. He sees Summer's distress. He sees Morty processing the change with that quiet, 1,000-yard stare quality that Morty carries through most of Season 3. Rick is not unaware of what his conversation with Beth cost in human terms. He is simply unwilling to weigh that cost against his own desire to remove Jerry from the picture and return to a version of of the household where he is the central figure. Because that is what the divorce gives Rick underneath everything else. It gives him the house back. Jerry out, Rick in, Beth's loyalty undivided and pointed in Rick's direction. The family reorganizes itself around Rick the way it always eventually does. And the removal of Jerry, the one member of the household who consistently argued, however ineffectively, that Rick's presence was damaging, makes that reorganization complete. The divorce is reversed by the end of season 3. Jerry and Beth find their way back to each other, and the reconciliation is handled with enough care that it does not feel unearned. Jerry grows during the season. Beth works through things. They choose each other again with something closer to full information than they had the first time. This is good. It is also beside the point. The point is not whether the damage was eventually repaired. The point is that Rick caused the damage on purpose, on the day he came home, as a direct response to Jerry suggesting accountability. The point is that 2 children went through their parents' divorce because their grandfather decided the marriage should end. The point is that Rick sat across from his daughter, a woman whose entire sense of self is tangled up in his approval, and used everything he knew about her to produce the outcome he wanted. He did it quietly. He did it without a device or a portal gun or anything that would make it look like what it was. He did it with a conversation. And then he moved back into the garage and waited for the family to reorganize itself around him, which it did because it always does. That is the decision, not the loud ones, not the explosions, not the planet-sized consequences that come with the science fiction plots. This one, a quiet conversation, a carefully chosen moment, a marriage that ended before Rick had even unpacked from prison. The smartest man in the universe decided that the easiest way to handle being held accountable was to remove the person doing the accounting. And he was right that it worked. It almost always does. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rick engineers a divorce to punish a man for suggesting consequences, and 2 children pay the price. But there is one decision on this list that does not involve Rick protecting himself, or punishing someone, or avoiding something difficult. The next section is about a decision that was supposed to be an experiment, a morally neutral leader built from the best and worst of human history. What Rick actually built was a person in constant agony, and what he did after building that person is the thing that defines the decision. Section 8. Creating Abradolf Linkler and abandoning him. There is a being in the world of Rick and Morty who should not exist. Not in the way that most things in the show should not exist, not in the sense of being dangerous or illegal or the product of someone pushing science further than it was meant to go. This being should not exist in a more specific, more painful way. He should not exist because his existence is suffering, because every moment he is alive, he is being pulled in 2 directions, so opposite and so powerful that simply being conscious is a form of torment. He was built that way. He was built to be that way. And the person who built him invited him to a party, watched him suffer in a room full of strangers, and then did nothing when he was dragged through a portal into a hostile alien dimension and killed. His name is Abradolf Linkler. He appears in Season 1, Episode 11, the episode titled Rixie Business, and his backstory is delivered in a few lines of casual conversation that Rick tosses out while greeting guests at a house party. Rick explains that he attempted to create a morally neutral super leader by combining the DNA of 2 of history's most famous and most opposite figures. One was Abraham Lincoln, the American president remembered for ending slavery, for holding a country together through its worst internal crisis, for a particular kind of quiet, burdened dignity. The other was Adolf Hitler, the German leader responsible for the Holocaust, for the deaths of millions of people across Europe, for a particular kind of charismatic, organized evil. Rick's stated goal was neutrality. Take the best parts of both, cancel out the worst parts of both, arrive at someone who could lead without the moral extremes that made each of the source figures so historically complicated. A leader without strong pulls in either direction. Balanced, stable, useful. What he actually created was a person at war with himself every second of every day. Abradolf Linkler is tall and physically imposing in the way that suggests someone built for authority. He has a mustache that sits uncomfortably between Lincoln's clean-shaven face and Hitler's small square of facial hair, landing somewhere that reads as neither. He speaks with a kind of desperate intensity, not the calm of someone who has found peace between opposing forces, but the strain of someone who has not and cannot. When he talks about himself, which he does with the urgency of someone who has been waiting for someone to ask, he describes an experience of consciousness that sounds like being 2 people who hate each other, forced to share one body. He tells Morty at the party that he craves approval, but is also compelled toward domination, that he wants to protect people, but also finds himself drawn to ideas of control and supremacy that horrify the other part of him, that he cannot resolve these impulses because they are not thoughts he is choosing, they are what he is made made of at the most fundamental level, and no amount of reflection or effort can separate them. He is not confused about what he is. He is perfectly clear about what he is, which makes it worse. He understands his own suffering completely and has no way out of it. He tells Morty this at a party, surrounded by Rick's other guests, while Rick is somewhere else not paying attention. This is the first layer of the decision's cruelty. Rick created this person, created him deliberately, with intention and scientific effort, from specific source material chosen for specific reasons, and then invited him to a social gathering as though he were a novelty. As though showing up with Abradolf Linkler were the equivalent of bringing an unusual bottle of wine. Here is this being I made. Interesting, right? Get yourself a drink. Linkler is not a weapon Rick built and then lost control of. He is not a side effect of something else Rick was trying to do. He is the direct result of Rick sitting down and deciding to combine two people into one and see what came out. The experiment had a subject, and the subject is conscious, and the subject is in pain, and Rick put him in that pain and then moved on to the next thing. At some point during the party, which gets out of hand in the way Rick's parties tend to, a group of aliens called squanches arrive, and things escalate. There is chaos. There is a portal involved. Abradolf Linkler ends up being pulled through the portal into what the show describes as a dimension full of tentacle monsters, a hostile, dangerous place with no obvious way back. He is fighting when he goes through. He is trying to do something heroic, or something that the Lincoln part of him is pushing toward as heroic, even as the other part of him is driving him toward violence for its own sake. He dies there. The tentacle monsters kill him. He does not come back. Rick does not go after him. Rick does not attempt to rescue. Rick does not appear to register Linkler's disappearance as something that requires a response. The party continues. The episode moves forward. Abradolf Linkler, the only one of his kind, the person Rick built from scratch, dies in a dimension he did not choose to enter, fighting creatures he did not choose to fight, while the man who made him is back on Earth watching the party wind down. The show does not return to Linkler. He is not mentioned again in any meaningful way. He exists in the single episode, suffers visibly during his time on screen, gets pulled through a portal, and is gone. The show treats him as a bit, a funny idea, a clever name, a moment of dark comedy, and moves on. What the show does not do, and what this section is attempting to do, is sit with what was actually done here. Rick made a person. This needs to be stated plainly before anything else, because the science fiction framing can make it easy to slide past. Rick did not program a robot. He did not create a computer simulation. He did not build something that acts like a person but is not really one. He combined genetic material from two human beings and produced a living, conscious, feeling person who thinks and suffers and wants things and is confused about his own nature. Abradolf Linkler is a person. The show treats him as one. He speaks, he grieves, he reaches out to Morty because he is lonely and confused and has no one else to talk to. He is a person, and Rick made him that way on purpose. The internal conflict that makes Linkler's existence so painful is not an accident. It is the design. The whole point of combining Lincoln and Hitler was to create someone pulled between two opposing moral poles. Rick understood, at least in theory, that this combination would produce tension. What he may not have fully considered, or what he considered and dismissed, is that tension in a living being is not an abstract quality. It is experienced. It is felt. It is lived every moment that person is alive. The question of whether Rick considered this and dismissed it, or whether he genuinely did not think it through, is the most revealing question you can ask about this decision, because the answer tells you something different about Rick depending on which way it falls. If Rick did not think it through, if he combined the DNA, watched a person emerge, and only then realized that the result was someone in constant internal war, then the decision is a case of extraordinary carelessness. The smartest man in the universe built a conscious being without adequately thinking about what that being's inner life would look like. He skipped the most important variable in the experiment. That is bad. That is the kind of bad that a person might, over time, come to terms with and try to make right. But if Rick thought it through and proceeded anyway, if he understood that combining these two specific people would produce exactly this kind of internal conflict, and he built Linkler knowing what he was building, then the decision is something darker. It means Rick looked at the prospect of a conscious being in permanent suffering and decided the experiment was worth running regardless. It means the question of what Linkler would experience did not factor into the decision at all, because Linkler's experience was never the point. The point was the idea. The point was seeing if the thing could be done. The show does not tell you which it is. Rick does not explain his reasoning in any depth. He introduces Linkler with the same casual energy he brings to everything, which could mean he has not thought about it deeply, or could mean he has thought about it and made his peace with the conclusion. Rick's casualness is not a reliable indicator of his inner state. We have seen enough of the show to know that what Rick presents on the surface and what Rick is actually processing underneath are often very different things. What the show does give you is Linkler's behavior, which is evidence in itself. Linkler gravitates toward Morty at the party, not toward Rick, toward Morty. He finds the youngest, least powerful person in the room and tries to connect with him, tries to explain himself, tries to be understood by someone who might be willing to listen without an agenda. This is not the behavior of someone who is fine. This is the behavior of someone profoundly isolated, someone who has been unable to find connection with anyone because no one knows what to do with what he is, because what he is something that should not exist. He reaches out to a 14-year-old at a party because that is the best option available to him. And Morty, to his credit, listens. Morty does not fully understand what Linkler is telling him. He is 14, and this is a strange conversation at what is supposed to be a fun night, but he listens. He gives Linkler the thing Rick never gave him, which is a moment of genuine attention. Then the chaos takes over, and Linkler is gone. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being something no one made room for, from existing in a shape that the world does not have a category for, that even the people closest to you do not know how to hold. Linkler is that kind of lonely in its most extreme form, because the person who made him not only did not make room for him, but does not appear to have thought about the question of room at all. Rick built him, put him in the world, and left the question of where Linkler fits in that world entirely unanswered. The decision to create Linkler is bad. The decision to leave him in a room full of strangers, without support or context or any acknowledgement of what he is going through, is worse. But the decision to do nothing when he disappears through the portal, to not attempt a rescue, to not even register his absence as something requiring a response, is the one that defines the full shape of the wrong here. Because that final non-decision tells you what Linkler was to Rick at every stage. He was an experiment. He was an idea that walked around and talked. He was something Rick made, which in Rick's worldview means something Rick owns, which in practice means something Rick can discard. We saw this with the microverse. Rick created a civilization and threatened to destroy it without hesitation when it became inconvenient. The logic is the same here, just applied to a single person instead of a world full of them. Rick is the smartest man in the universe. He has access to portal technology that connects to virtually every dimension in existence. He can travel anywhere. He can find things that are lost. He found a replacement dimension after destroying an entire Earth. He located Rick Prime across the infinite multiverse over the course of decades. The idea that Rick could not find one specific being in a specific dimension if he chose to look does not hold up. He did not choose to look. Linkler died in that dimension, fighting, confused, pulled between heroism and violence as he had been his entire existence. And Rick stayed at the party. The music played, the night wound down, and whatever was left of Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler, combined into a person who deserved better than what he got, stayed behind in a hostile dimension full of tentacle monsters, while the man who built him went to bed. This is the quietest decision on this list. It does not involve a planet of people, or a civilization inside a battery, or a family being torn apart. It is one person, created, used as a conversation piece, and abandoned. The smallness of it, the fact that Linkler is a minor character in a single episode, played briefly, given a handful of scenes, is part of what makes it so specific and so damning. Rick builds things all the time. He builds devices and ships and universes and plans. He very rarely thinks carefully about what it means to build something that can suffer. Linkler is the most concentrated version of this failure, a conscious being built, displayed, and lost in the span of one evening by a man who was already thinking about the next thing before the portal even closed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Abradolf Linkler is one person, one conscious being built by Rick and left behind. But Rick's capacity for abandonment does not stop at individuals. There is one decision on this list that did not hurt one person or one family or one planet. It created an institution, an entire society that has been running on exploitation and suffering ever since Rick lost interest in it. The next section is about the Citadel of Ricks, and what happens when the smartest man in the universe builds something, decides it is beneath him, and walks away. Section 9. Forming the Citadel of Ricks, then walking away. To understand what the Citadel of Ricks is, you have to understand what Rick was doing before it existed. After Rick Prime, the version of Rick responsible for killing Rick C-137's wife Diane and his daughter Beth, committed those murders and disappeared back into the multiverse, Rick C-137 made a decision that would consume decades of his life. He decided to find Rick Prime and make him pay for what he did. This is the backstory that the show builds contoured across multiple seasons and finally confirms in Season 6. Rick C-137, the Rick the show follows, is not the original Rick of any dimension in the typical sense. He is a man whose family was taken from him, who then spent an enormous portion of his life hunting the person responsible across infinite dimensions. The hunting required portal technology. Rick Prime was the first Rick to invent the ability to travel between dimensions. He invented it and then used that invention to go to Rick C-137's home and destroy his family before vanishing. Rick C-137, motivated by grief and rage, figured out the technology independently. He became, as the show describes it, the only other version of Rick to actually invent interdimensional travel on his own, outside of Rick Prime. With portal technology came access to infinite versions of himself. Every dimension has a Rick, or almost every dimension. The show eventually reveals that the multiverse has been shaped in a specific way that concentrates dimensions where Rick is the smartest being, which is its own enormous topic. But the relevant fact here is that Rick C-137, traveling the multiverse in search of Rick Prime, encountered countless other versions of himself, and for a period of time, he did something that the show reveals in pieces across seasons 1 and 6. He killed them. Not all of them, and not randomly, but Rick C-137 spent years hunting alternate versions of himself as part of his search for Rick Prime. The logic, in whatever form Rick's logic took during this period of his life, seems to have been connected to the search itself. The other Ricks were either obstacles or sources of information or simply in the way. The show does not give you a clean accounting of this period. What it gives you is the result. The surviving Ricks, the ones who were not killed, the ones who saw what Rick C-137 was doing and understood that he represented a genuine threat, eventually did something unexpected. They surrendered. They came together, collectively, and offered Rick C-137 a deal. Stop hunting us. Let us live. In exchange, they would do whatever he required. Rick C-137 accepted the surrender. And then, rather than simply walking away and leaving the other Ricks to scatter back to their own dimensions, he oversaw the construction of something, the Citadel of Ricks. It is a space station, an enormous city-sized structure floating in a pocket of space between dimensions, designed to serve as a home base for all the Ricks and Mortys who wanted to live together outside of any individual dimension's rules. Every Rick gets a Morty. Every Morty serves a function. There is governance, there is economy, there is a social structure. From the outside, it looks like a community. It looks like Rick doing something constructive with the chaos he created during his hunting years, turning a period of violence into something organized, giving the surviving Ricks a place to exist safely. Then, Rick C-137 left. He built it, oversaw its creation, established the structure, and walked away. He went back to his own life, eventually landing in the dimension where Morty Prime lives, taking the place of that dimension's Rick, starting the adventures that the show follows from its beginning. The Citadel continued without him. The other Ricks and Mortys kept living there. The institution Rick created kept running. What it became in his absence is the subject of Season 3, Episode 7, titled The Ricklantis Mix-Up, which is the highest-rated episode in the show's history, according to viewer scores. The episode does something unusual. It follows neither Rick C-137 nor Morty Prime for its entire runtime. Instead, it follows multiple different Ricks and Mortys living inside the Citadel, each in a different situation, each revealing a different layer of what the place has actually become. What it has become is ugly. The Citadel runs on a class system. At the top are the Ricks who have done well, scientists, politicians, figures of authority who have accumulated power inside the institution. Below them are the working Ricks, the ordinary ones, the ones doing jobs that do not involve genius or exploration or any of the things that Ricks are supposedly built for. There are Ricks working factory jobs. There are Ricks who have given up on being exceptional and settled into small, ordinary lives inside a society that was supposedly built to free them from ordinary limitations. And below the working Ricks are the Mortys. The Mortys in the Citadel are not partners. They are not the emotional counterparts that the Rick and Morty relationship is sometimes framed as, with all the complicated affection and mutual dependence that implies. In the Citadel, Mortys are a labor class. They do the jobs the Ricks do not want. They live in worse conditions. They have less power and fewer options and no real avenue for advancement in a system that was designed by Ricks for Ricks and never seriously considered what the Mortys inside it would need or want. The episode follows one Morty in particular, a Morty who works in a factory that makes wafers called Simple Rick wafers. The wafers are flavored, somehow, with the brain waves of a Rick who is kept in a glass tank and fed a continuous loop of his happiest memory, the moment his daughter was born. This Rick is essentially imprisoned, his brain harvested for a flavor, while the factory around him produces snack snack food. This is considered normal in the Citadel. This is a business model that exists and operates openly. The factory Morty tries to do the right thing. He tries to help. He tries to work within the system and find a path that does not require him to participate in the exploitation around him. The episode does not reward him for this. The system is too large, too entrenched, too thoroughly designed to protect the people at the top and extract from the people at the bottom. The Morty's attempts to change things from the inside accomplish nothing. The institution absorbs him. Meanwhile, the episode follows a Morty running for president of the Citadel. This Morty presents himself as an outsider, someone who understands what it is like to be at the bottom, who speaks the language of the Mortys who have been overlooked and underserved by the institution. He runs a campaign built on the promise of change, on the idea that the Citadel can be something different from what it has become. He wins. He gets the power he was seeking. He is Evil Morty. Evil Morty, the most dangerous recurring figure in the show's later seasons. The character who eventually tears a hole in the fabric of the multiverse to escape the systems that Rick built, began his climb to power inside the Citadel. The institution that Rick C-137 created as the resolution to his years of violence against other Ricks became the proving ground for the most destructive force in the show's mythology. Evil Morty did not come from nowhere. He came from the inside of a system that was designed to keep Morty subordinate, and he learned everything he needed to know about power by watching how the Citadel used it. Rick C-137, it should be noted, did not build the Citadel to be exploitative. There is no evidence that he sat down and designed a class system with Mortys at the bottom. What he did was build a structure, give it an initial shape, and then leave before anyone had seriously worked through what that structure would mean in practice over time. He handed the Citadel to the collective of Ricks, a group of people who, by definition, share most of his traits, including his tendency to prioritize his own needs and intelligence above the needs of others, and trusted that they would figure it out. They figured it out in a way that served themselves. This is the specific failure that makes the Citadel so damning as a decision. Rick did not intend the suffering that followed, but the suffering that followed was entirely predictable, given what he built and who he left in charge of it. A society of Ricks, given power over a population of Mortys, was always going to produce a hierarchy that placed Ricks above Mortys. That is not a surprising outcome. That is the obvious outcome, visible from the moment of the Citadel's founding to anyone willing to think it through. Rick is the smartest man in the universe. He could think it through. He chose not to. Or he thought it through and decided it was not his problem. Or he simply did not care enough about what the Mortys inside the Citadel would experience to factor their welfare into the design. Any of these possibilities says something specific and damning about how Rick thinks about the people around him who are not him. The show's first significant look at the Citadel comes in Season 1, Episode 10, titled Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, when Rick C-137 is taken there to stand trial for crimes against other Ricks. This is the episode where the audience first learns the Citadel exists. Rick C-137's reaction to being there is contempt. He does not look at the Citadel and feel pride or ownership or any of the complicated emotions someone might feel about an institution they helped create. He looks at it like someone who has moved past a phase of his life and finds being reminded of it mildly irritating. He built something that thousands of beings live inside, and he views it the way someone might view an old hobby they no longer practice. It was something he did once. He has moved on. The contrast between Rick's indifference and what the Citadel actually is, a living, functioning society full of real beings with real experiences, is one of the show's cleanest illustrations of how Rick processes the consequences of his actions. The consequences are real. The suffering inside the Citadel is real. The Mortys working factory jobs and living in reduced circumstances while Ricks accumulate power above them are real. Rick's engagement with all of this is essentially zero. He shows up occasionally because the plot requires it. He escapes when he needs to escape. He has no ongoing relationship with the thing he built, no sense of responsibility toward it, no effort to shape it into something better than what it became, no acknowledgement that he has any stake in what happens to the beings inside it. The Citadel is eventually destroyed by Evil Morty in the Season 5 finale, Rick Murray Jack, when Evil Morty tears through the wall of the central finite curve and escapes into a part of the multiverse that Rick's influence has never touched. The destruction of the Citadel is presented as a liberation for Evil Morty, as his escape from a system designed to keep Mortys subordinate. But it is also the death of everyone still living there. Every Rick and Morty on that station, everyone who had built their life inside the institution Rick created, is gone. Rick C-137 is not there when it happens. He and Morty Prime are somewhere else entirely. The show sends them to Atlantis as a joke, a deliberate misdirection while the Citadel's most important storyline resolves without them. Rick does not witness the destruction of the thing he built. He does not have a reckoning with it. He finds out what happened and the show moves forward. The Citadel began as Rick Rick's attempt to resolve a violent chapter of his life, to convert years of killing other Ricks into something constructive, to give the survivors a place to exist. The intention at its foundation was not cruelty. It might even have been, in the most complicated, Rick-adjacent way, something like remorse. He had spent years as a threat to every other version of himself in the multiverse. The Citadel was the alternative he offered. Come here, build something, live. But good intentions at the founding of something do not determine what that something becomes. What the Citadel became was determined by what Rick built into its structure and what he left out. He built in the Ricks. He left out any serious consideration of the Mortys. He built in a governing body made of people who think exactly like him. He left out any mechanism for accountability or challenge to that governing body. He built in walls and rules and an economy. He left out any genuine equity between the people living inside those walls. And then he walked away and let the machine run. Every Morty working a factory job in the Citadel, every Morty used as a shield or a tool or a subordinate by the Ricks above them, every simple Rick trapped in a tank while his happiest memory gets turned into a snack. Every Morty who voted for Evil Morty, because Evil Morty was the first figure in the Citadel's history to speak to what Mortys actually needed. All of them are living inside the consequences of a decision Rick made and then stopped thinking about. The Citadel is what Rick's abandonment looks like at scale. Not one person left behind in a hostile dimension. Not one family destabilized by a calculated conversation. An entire society built on a foundation Rick designed, running on suffering Rick made possible, destroyed in the end by the resentment Rick's design created. He built it. He left. The machine ran. People suffered. That is the decision. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Citadel shows what happens when Rick creates something large and walks away from it before it fully takes shape. But there is one final decision on this list that does not involve building anything or destroying anything or abandoning anything. It involves a Tuesday afternoon, a disagreement, and Rick going to war with the entire government of the United States because someone implied he had obligations. And what that war reveals about Rick is the most honest and most uncomfortable thing the show has ever put on screen about who he actually is. Section 10. Going to war with the president over his ego. There is an episode in Season 3 where Rick Sanchez almost destroys his family's entire life on Earth because he would not shake someone's hand. Not metaphorically, not as a dramatic exaggeration of something smaller. Rick C-137, the smartest man in the universe, the person who has survived alien prisons and robot uprisings and the collapse of an intergalactic government, picks a fight with the President of the United States that escalates to the point where the family's ability to stay on Earth is genuinely at risk, their home is under threat, their safety is compromised, and the relationship between Rick and his grandson reaches one of its lowest points. All of it traces back to a handshake that Rick decided he was too important to give. Season 3, Episode 10, titled The Rickchurian Morty Date, is the season finale, and it is doing something more specific than it first appears. On the surface, it looks like a comedy about Rick being difficult. Underneath that surface, it is the most direct statement the show has ever made about the central lie Rick tells himself. The lie that he does not care, that nothing matters to him, that he is free of the needs and attachments that make other people predictable and therefore controllable. The episode is built to test that lie and show you, clearly and without much commentary, that it does not hold. It starts simply. The President of the United States, a recurring character in the show who has an established relationship with Rick, a mutual respect built on previous interactions where Rick helped with genuine national security situations, calls Rick and Morty in for a mission. There is something in a bunker, something unusual. The President's people cannot handle it, and he needs Rick's specific kind of expertise. Rick and Morty show up. The thing in the bunker turns out to be manageable. It is handled. The crisis, such as it is, gets resolved without the enormous drama you might expect from a season finale cold open. Rick and Morty are ready to leave. The President is there to see them off. He extends his hand for a handshake, a normal, human gesture of acknowledgement, the kind of thing two people do when they have just accomplished something together. Rick does not take it. He does not refuse loudly or dramatically. He does not make a speech about why he is above handshakes or deliver a monologue about the meaninglessness of social rituals. He just does not engage. He turns away. He makes it clear, without saying it directly, that shaking the President's hand is beneath him, that the President is not at a level that warrants Rick's formal acknowledgement, that the gesture implies a degree of equality between them that Rick is not willing to accept. The President is offended. This is understandable. He has called Rick in for help. Rick has provided that help, and Rick has then treated the moment of thanks as an imposition. The president pushes back. Words are exchanged. The situation does not resolve cleanly. Rick and Morty leave. Rick considers the matter closed, because from Rick's perspective, it is. He showed up. He did the thing. Whatever social expectation exists around what happens after is not his responsibility. He does not owe anyone a performance of mutual respect. He does not shake hands to make people feel good about themselves. He goes home. The president does not consider the matter closed. What follows is an escalating conflict between Rick and the full resources of the United States government. And the escalation is almost entirely driven by Rick's refusal to treat the situation as something worth de-escalating. The president sends people. Rick handles the people. The president sends more people with better equipment. Rick handles those too. Each time the government makes a move, Rick responds with something that makes the previous response look small. And each response Rick gives is more than necessary. Not because he needs to be that thorough, but because being that thorough is a message. It says, "You cannot match me. Stop trying." Morty watches this unfold and becomes increasingly disturbed by it. He tries to talk to Rick. He tries to point out that this is unnecessary, that the conflict could be ended at almost any point by Rick simply offering some version of the acknowledgement the president was looking for in the first place. Not submission, not an apology, just a gesture that says, "You are a person and I recognize that." Morty can see that the whole situation is absurd, that Rick is burning energy and creating danger for the family over something that started with a handshake, and he says so. Rick is not interested in hearing it. This is the part of the episode that matters most, and it is the part that connects most directly to everything else on this list. Rick has spent 10 sections of this essay making decisions that hurt people, decisions that destroyed civilizations, ended marriages, killed alternate versions of his grandson, created conscious beings, and abandoned them to suffer. Each of those decisions had a layer of justification available. The Croninberg world was an accident gone wrong. The microverse was practical. The divorce was revenge, which at least has a logic to it. The save point device was a lesson, however cruel the lesson was. The cloning was fear. This decision has no such layer. There is nothing underneath the handshake refusal except ego. Rick does not want to shake the president's hand because shaking it would imply that the president is someone whose acknowledgement Rick requires. And requiring anyone's acknowledgement is something Rick has organized his entire identity around refusing to admit. He does not shake hands. He does not perform respect. He does not lower himself to the social rituals that ordinary people use to signal their place in relation to each other. He is above all of that, except he is not. And the episode is about proving that he is not. Because while Rick is in the middle of this war with the government, while he is deploying countermeasures and handling agents and making it clear that he cannot be touched, Beth and Jerry are in the process of getting back together. Their reconciliation, which has been building across the back half of season 3, is reaching the point where it could actually stick. Beth has worked through enough of what she was avoiding to choose Jerry again with something closer to clarity than she had before. Jerry has grown enough to be worth choosing. The reunion is possible. Rick finds out it is happening, and his reaction to it is immediate and physical. He stops what he is doing and goes to intervene. Not because he has thought it through, not because he has a specific, reasoned objection to Beth and Jerry being together, because the idea of Beth choosing Jerry, of Beth reorganizing her life in a way that does not have Rick at the center, produces in Rick something he cannot manage. He cannot let it happen. He does not make a choice to feel this way. He just cannot let it happen. This is the 40 seconds the show has been building toward since the pilot. Rick has told everyone, Morty, Beth, Summer, the audience, that he does not need people, that he is not attached, that the family is a convenience, a cover, a practical arrangement that benefits him and should not be read as anything more. He has said versions of this in multiple episodes, in multiple ways, with the confidence of someone who has checked and rechecked the math and knows the answer. And then Beth says she is getting back with Jerry, and Rick stops winning a war against the United States government to go stop a marriage. He tries to talk Beth out of it. He argues. He pushes. He does the thing he did at the beginning of season 3 in reverse. Instead of carefully dismantling her marriage with targeted emotional precision, he is now trying to hold the pieces together with the same urgency. And the urgency is visible in a way that Rick's emotions almost never are. He is not casual about this. He is not performing indifference. He is genuinely scared of what Beth choosing Jerry means for his place in her life. Beth and Jerry notice. They see it. The episode gives them a moment of clarity that cuts through everything else happening. The government agents outside outside, the ongoing conflict, all of it, where they look at Rick and understand something about him that he has never directly said, that he needs them, that the family is not a convenience or a cover, that Rick Sanchez, who claims to be free of all attachment, has organized his entire life around these specific people and cannot walk away from them. The president eventually shows up, the conflict reaches its peak, and Rick, faced with the actual endpoint of the war he started over a handshake, does something that the show presents without fanfare, but which is one of the most significant moments in 3 seasons of television. He cannot leave. The option is available. Rick has the technology. He can go anywhere. He can step through a portal and be in a different dimension before anyone in the room can react. And he can keep going. And he never has to be in this house or this family or this conflict again. He has done it before. He abandoned entire dimensions. He walked away from the Citadel. He left Abradolf Linkler in a hostile dimension without a second thought. Walking away is something Rick is extraordinarily good at. He cannot do it here. He stands in the room and he cannot make himself go. Eventually, a compromise is reached. The president gets a kind of acknowledgement, not quite the handshake, something that allows both of them to move forward without either one having completely submitted to the other. Rick gets to stay in his dimension with his family. The conflict ends. Everyone goes home. The mechanics of the resolution are less important than what the episode revealed on the way to it. Because the war with the president, all of it, from the first refusal to the final compromise, was never really about the handshake. It was about what the handshake represented. The president is one of the most powerful people on Earth. Shaking his hand, in the context of being summoned to help him, carries an implication that Rick is a resource the government can call on, that Rick has obligations, that there are people above Rick, or at least people Rick works for, or at least people Rick owes something. Rick cannot exist inside that implication, not because he does not understand it, he understands it perfectly, but because accepting it would require him to acknowledge that he is embedded in relationships that make demands on him, and that those relationships shape what he can and cannot do, and that being shaped by relationships is something that happens to him the same way it happens to everyone else. This is the thing Rick has been running from across 10 sections of this essay. Every bad decision on this list, at its root, is connected to the same refusal. He cannot acknowledge that the people around him matter to him in ways he cannot control, so he makes decisions that hurt them rather than be honest about it. He cannot accept that fixing the Croninberg world is his responsibility, so he frames abandonment as practicality. He cannot sit in a therapy room and be seen clearly, so he turns himself into a vegetable. He cannot answer his daughter's question about whether he wants her around, so he erases the answer from his own memory. And he cannot shake the president's hand, so he goes to war. The handshake decision is the smallest decision on this list in terms of what triggered it. It is a social gesture. It takes 2 seconds. It would have cost Rick nothing in any practical sense. No resources, no technology, no danger, no sacrifice of any kind. He refused it because accepting it would have required him to briefly inhabit the role of someone who operates inside a social world with other people. Someone who gives acknowledgement as well as receiving it. Someone who is connected to others in ways that create small obligations. Rick would rather fight the United States government than inhabit that role for 2 seconds. The decision to not shake a hand, and then to not back down from the consequences of not shaking that hand, and then to endanger his family's safety on Earth rather than offer some version of the acknowledgement that would have ended the conflict. This decision is the most purely revealing thing Rick does in the entire series. Not because of what it cost, though it cost real things, but because of what it exposed. It exposed that Rick's claimed indifference is a performance. That the man who says nothing matters to him will burn down a conflict with a world government rather than risk the appearance of needing someone. That the man who says he is not attached to his family will stop in the middle of that conflict to prevent his daughter from going back to her husband. That the man who says he could leave at any time, who has the technology and the intelligence to go anywhere, stands in a room with his family and cannot make his feet move toward the door. He told Morty once, in an earlier season, that the only evidence anyone needs that he cares about the family is that he is still there, that he stays. That for all the damage and all the chaos and all the decisions on this list, he keeps coming back. The Richturian Morty date is the episode that proves this is not a choice Rick makes. It is not a decision he weighs and arrives at after consideration. He cannot leave. Not because the portal gun is broken or the situation traps him or someone has taken away his technology. He cannot leave because leaving would mean letting go of the people he has spent the whole show claiming not to need. The handshake was never the point. The family was always the point. And the worst decision in this section is not refusing the handshake. It is spending 3 seasons and 7 seasons beyond that pretending that none of this is true while making making every terrible decision on this list in service of maintaining the pretense. Rick Sanchez is not free. He has never been free. He is the most tightly bound person in the show, bound by grief for Diane, bound by need for Beth, bound by something genuine and complicated and completely unacknowledged for Morty. And every catastrophic decision he has ever made has been, in some way, an attempt to avoid sitting with that fact. He would rather end a world than admit he needs it. He would rather be a pickle. He would rather go to war. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.